and welcome. Today we're having a discussion with Jason Eric Perlman, who's the writer and director of Sight, and we're alongside Brock Van Wey, who you may know by his recording name, bvdub. Brock composed and performed the score to Sight. My name is Jennifer Akana Sturla. I'm a filmmaker who is just finishing up a documentary on Hawaiian singer-songwriter Is, whose medley, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, What a Wonderful World, you may have heard before. So I'm going to be doing kind of more music-focused questions here with the two of you. So to begin with, Jason, can you explain how Brock's music first came to you, how he first got on your radar, and how you went about approaching him for the film score?
Absolutely. I have for quite some time been a devotee of ambient music, electronic ambient music. I listen to it to write, I listen to it to just give me a soundtrack to the world when I'm walking around. I've been very enmeshed in that type of music for quite some time, and because Brock's presence in that space is so well known, his music did make its way to me just by, originally playlists and other things I was listening to, and I seized upon his particular style of composition across multiple genres that he works in, more earlier, more beat-based work, and also his ambient, more cinematic type of feeling material. And as I listened more and more to his voluminous output, I thought this is exactly the type of mood for this film. In fact, I wrote the entire screenplay listening to his music. And every time I would go back in across what were literally years of different intervals of rewriting, I would still every time listen to his music and a playlist that I continued to build of his material, because the consistency of that sound and mood, I wanted always to be sort of templatizing what I would write. So it always felt coherent with that mood and that feeling that I got from his material, from his compositions. So I don't mean to embarrass with any degree of over fanboyishness, but that's the truth. I always wrote the script listening to his material. When it came time to actually move towards making the film, we went by way of his record labels and contacts in that sphere to try to uh, track down his direct contact, excuse me, and we did get a hold of each other, and we had a conversation about the film and what it was about and the type of feel and mood of it, and that catapulted us into discussions that led to us working together.
So Brock, Sight marks your first film score, if I'm right. Can you speak about the different processes for composing for picture versus writing, music that you'd record on an album?
Yeah, this was a fairly difficult transition in the beginning. And this is me returning the fanboy, but I mean, Jason, he really taught me a lot about how to do that, because I didn't really, I just kind of a one man, it's a very selfish endeavor what I'm creating. I'm just locked in a room all day, 12, 14 hours a day. I don't speak to anyone. I don't have any influence from anyone else. So it's just whatever I want to do and whatever's in my own head. So to now try to interpret or express something that's in someone else's head in a way that's not only my way, but also their way in this kind of cooperative thing. It's a very different, I don't cooperate well with people. So this
Sure you
was,
do.
well, before this, I didn't. So I'm not known for that, but it was challenging, quite challenging at first. But as he kind of like walked me through it a bit, and I learned a little more about it, it takes on its own meaning in a whole other way that working by yourself couldn't. So it's definitely very challenging to take a lot of these things into consideration and try to bring life to someone else's vision. And I thought in the beginning it seemed easier than it would be. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I get this movie, I'm going to do what I want, and like, that's it. But it was not that simple, right? It was like a lot more complicated than that, which at first was challenging, but in the end, rewarding. That was the word. It's just rewarding in its own whole other way. And I learned like so much about what it means to be able to do that and to be able to like integrate what I wanted to say or what I felt into his original, and the fact that we had a ton of communication throughout that whole thing was really key, because a lot of things that maybe I had interpreted in a certain way, I wasn't maybe totally correct. I was a little bit correct, but not always 100% correct. Yeah, it was extremely challenging, but extremely rewarding. I mean, I think he would probably say the same.
100%.
Okay,
On
great.
both.
So what were some of the challenges for this new form of composing, and how did the two of you, work together to achieve a mutually agreed soundscape for the film and that collaboration you're talking about?
I'm only used to having my voice, right? But now you're trying to, not only you have two voices, but you're trying to give voice to someone else's ideas, which is something that I've never tried to do before. So I was just used to, even when we started this, when I would see a scene, I watched the movie or certain scenes, I would just, to be honest, just do it the way I would think to do it. However, I was interpreting it. It wouldn't really come into my mind that there was other elements in there. So I had to learn to kind of, at first it would be him telling me more about that. And then over time, I would learn more and more about what his actual intention was. So I needed less and less of that interjection. But in the beginning, yeah, it's difficult for me to create something and then be told that any of it needs to be altered in any manner. That's not something I react very well to.
Right.
That was a huge challenge for me. But even my girlfriend, Jason's very good at that. And at one point, she even said that she wanted him to teach her how to like tell me to change things, because she never seen me be able to actually accept that.
Do a private counseling.
Yeah, private counsel on how to actually tell me to do something differently, because
Well,
she's not mastered that.
to riff on that a little bit too, because I think one of the things that was really an organic outgrowth of how we did work together was because music is inherently difficult to describe, right? I mean, it's not so banal as saying we want something sad here, we want something energetic here. Those kinds of adjectives are really pretty useless when it comes to getting these things right and getting them, as lived in as we, I think, arrived at. And when you would do your first pass on let's say a section of scenes, we would get into dialogue and we would really kind of almost break down and discover new emotional and kind of thematic elements in those scenes that brought us both to new places of
Yeah.
awareness and experimentation of where we pushed the score and musical elements to go. So it wasn't really like in any stage where, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but you knew exactly where things were going, or I knew exactly where things were going either. And I think what we did was sort of get a base coat and then talk into it and then evolve it. And through that process, we kept discovering new off ramps and new roads to go down that led to what ultimately ended up being, the cues that grew out of that process. So it wasn't in any way like someone has an idea and it's a set concrete thing and it's just a question of trying to thread the maze to get there. It really was like there's a feeling and an impulse for what this needs musically and what's happening in the world of the movie, but then working with each other conversationally and through iterations of cues to find what really works up against picture. And obviously I like to think we got better and better at that, more and more telepathic with that as we went on.
Well, I think that's kind of the key way you said, like, up against picture, right? That was what was very new for me.
Yeah.
So I'm just used to working on my own head and whatever pictures are in my head. And now you have a set series of images that you need to work. I wouldn't say within, it's not necessarily constraining, but you're like working off of that and reflecting
Mhm.
off of that. So it's just a very different experience. But I think with how many endless times I watched the movie and all the scenes, and I know every single word of the movie by heart and every single second of everything, I think at a certain point, I ended up kind of living it in the some of the same space that you made it. So then as it went on and on and on, it all started to kind of make more sense because it becomes more organic. And I
Yeah.
think you kind of realize more and more where it's exactly what it's trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one last exponent to that too. I think I remember so clearly when we had kind of breakthroughs where because the movie its topic and its storyline is dealing with some relatively complex philosophical things, overlays of time, characters being more than one person and different sort of shades of their soul, so to speak. We were finding that there were sort of ways to mirror some of the story by way of things that were happening in the music. There were ways that you were finding ways to repeat and integrate themes that perhaps we'd heard earlier that then come back in and take on sort of a new life and meaning later, or even certain characters that when we saw them, we would have a certain sonic signature that was evolving across, successive scenes. So there were some real sort of aha moments that we got to together that were ways to make the music really fully integrate with the story that we were attempting to tell that I think ended up working pretty seamlessly when all was said and done.
Okay, excellent. Well, a really interesting facet here is I believe, Brock, you were living in China at the time of composing the score. And
Yeah,
Jason, for some of Sight explores historical events that occurred in China. So
yeah.
can either or both of you speak about how China might have influenced the score, you living there, and then Jason, obviously the subject matter relating to China.
For me, I mean, yeah, this is, the part from Chinese history that deals with is a very, very raw subject in China. So everybody there knows about this. There's not a single Chinese person in China that doesn't know about that,
Mhm.
what happened there. So it's yeah, there's a lot of emotional connection to that because people, I mean, you can't even really find people between the Nanjing massacre or that like that, in China that weren't affected in some way through their family through these kind of things. So yeah, it's an extremely emotional topic out there. Even when I said that, told my girlfriend that that was what we were doing, she got kind of, she's not an emotional person, but even it kind of struck something in her. So I think in that sense, it can't help but be layered in there somewhere, even if it's somewhat subconsciously. I don't think I consciously applied China into it, but I've been asked this kind of question before, and I mean, the fact of the matter is a massive part, if not the majority of music that people have heard of mine was created while I've been living in China. There's clearly probably, some subconscious
Mhm.
influences in there somewhere. I wouldn't say consciously necessarily. Um, but yeah, I think it definitely to be in the country where that happened, you can't help but be affected by that to some extent. So I'm sure it comes. I think of all the other of my other pieces that were created there, I don't think there's like overt influence, but I think in this one there probably is a bit more because I think it's kind of hard not to have that seep into it when you're in the place where a lot of that happened. I mean that part in history is still talked about in my university by my students. I mean, it's still a very,
Mhm.
it's a very raw wound on Chinese society. I think it always will be. So
Where do you teach?
I teach at a university in Shaoxing in like it's southeast China. I teach university students, so we talk about a whole, plethora of subjects. And you don't really talk about that in class because we don't talk about things that get
Yeah.
political or anything like that, but things just bounce off each other and whatever. And I mean, things from that time and that era are, I mean, like I said, even my girlfriend, who's the least political, least any of that kind of person on the planet, she still knows everything about all that stuff. I think there's definitely a lot of influence in there, whether it was conscious or subconscious. So I think it definitely played a part.
Yeah, I do think that being in, you know, granted, the events that are depicted and that we were just referring to a little obliquely that are referenced in the film are from World War II. They're deep in the cultural memory of China, and I think they're obviously pervasive in the culture there in terms of generational discussion of what that time period meant for the country and for the people who endured that horrific set of events. But I think when you're in an environment, when you're within a cultural setting, even like you said, Brock, where you're not necessarily conscious of sort of directly working with the inspiration or sort of the stimuli that's around you. I think that there's necessarily something that the antenna is still kind of picking up and tuning in that comes down through the artistic efforts. It sort of gets inside one way or another, whether we're aware of it or not. And I remember a really interesting couple of weeks of interchange between you and I, which was quite serendipitous for the project because I was traveling throughout Japan when you were in China, and obviously the conflict that we're referencing was between Japan and China during World War II. And my time there was partially very much devoted to research and to also taking some field recordings and things like that while I was on the ground in Japan for several weeks. But we were doing a lot of our speaking with one another about the score during that time period, which was really actually kind of inspiring, at least to me. I mean, I know that you're more accustomed and more entrenched in that part of the world, and you've been there for many, many years at that point. But in the period working with you when I was there, and it was the closest at that time that we were actually on the same time zones,
Right.
close enough, which was a novelty in its own right, since we had been doing a lot of our conversations from me being in California and you being in China. But
Right.
there was something very interesting and very crackling with life during that period that was fairly early on in our work collaboratively on talking into the score because of that sense of place and being enveloped by a lot of the cultural influence that does have voice within the film. So it's an interesting interval of our collaboration that was in that overlap.
Well, I think there's something else that kind of plays into that, and that Japan to some extent, but in China especially, like this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition. I hate the word juxtaposition, but
There it is.
interesting relation to the movie. I hate that word, but especially in art, it's just so painfully overused. But um, I think there's an interesting connection there because in China, I mean, there almost is no past because the past is never forgotten. There, like history is so important there
Yeah.
that, like, to them, something like that might have well happened yesterday. They don't let any of that go.
Hmm.
And we could argue all day whether that's right or wrong. That's up to them. But like anything in Chinese history throughout all of its thousands of years, as far as China is concerned, is basically all one mass.
Hmm.
So there isn't really like forgetting of the past or, oh, that was World War II. So that, no, it's like it happened yesterday. So they're kind of like that with all things, really. It's kind of this one amorphous
Hmm.
monolith of history that doesn't really have a past or a present, um, which is a bit interesting considering, its relation to the movie. But
Yeah.
I think that kind of we as Americans, you kind of put that into our perspective is here, like you don't really even see, traces of a ton of American history. It's just gone. But all that stuff is still there. And so a lot of
Yeah.
times, like if I coming from my perspective, maybe talking to Chinese people about something, and to me, I'm like, yeah, well, that's way a long time ago. This is just a concept for them that doesn't exist.
Mhm.
that you just, oh, you just put it in the past, now it's gone. This is not how that culture functions.
Interesting.
So yeah, in that sense, it's like even the history is always in the present. It's like it's always all together all the time. So it's kind of another layer.
One of our key producers and executive producer on the film actually is originally from Indonesia, but her family is from China. Her roots on her father and mother's side are Chinese, and one generation off in terms of settling and having their kids in Indonesia. And when we were early on, still shaping the script and talking into using some of that historical reference in the film, it was very interesting to hear her echo a lot of what you're saying insofar as, this cultural memory of those events still very active and discussed even amongst her family in their
Yeah.
removal from, actually being on the ground in China anymore, whereas living in Indonesia. But uh, very much was clear from speaking with her and understanding her perspective on those events too, that these live in sort of a suspension of a forever nowness,
Yeah.
which I think also, like you said, has a very interesting connect up with some of the sort of quantum physics and philosophy of time that we're playing with within our film. So there's a whole Rubik's cube there of sorts.
Jason, you're a musician.
I
I
am.
know that well. So, and you write music as well as play music. You've got instruments all over. Well, I don't know how it is in your house. In your previous abodes, there are lots and lots of instruments. So, do you find, or do the two of you find that being able to speak to one another in musical terms, as mutual musicians, was helpful, or was that a hindrance to your collaboration?
I don't think we did much musical theoretical conversation. As I recall, I mean, correct me if you remember and we're traumatized otherwise, Brock, but I don't think we didn't get into, keys and time signatures and modulations and sort of theoretical music discussion. I think what was more valuable, at least be coming from a place of musical awareness and capacity on my end, was I could hear the technicalities of what Brock was doing, and I could understand where he was sort of pointing his ship in various cues. And that helped me to speak to him more, I think, ultimately on a sort of emotional and in some scenes on more of an intellectual plane about where the music could go and what it could sort of underwrite and emphasize within scenes. But I don't think, and for probably good reason, I don't think we got particularly granular at any point in conversation about actual musical sort of specifics. Like,
No, I don't think we ever do.
yeah,
And it
I don't know
wouldn't,
that it
I
would have
don't,
been helpful, quite
no,
honestly.
and I don't communicate in that way anyway, even though like, I'm very classically trained and I
Mhm.
compose music for duets, trios, quartets, a symphony, all this stuff, even when I was, 12. So like I have all that, but I don't like speak in that. I have that training, but I don't speak in that language. So even if you had tried to speak to me in that language, it would have been like talking to a brick, even more like talking to a brick wall than I already am. Um, yeah, it's not the way I speak like we spoke, right? Very philosophical, intellectual, emotional. Like you go way more telling me about the emotion of something you're trying to, this I understand. I wouldn't really understand that kind of language anyway. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think but it did, besides my respect for you on a lot of levels, I know that you are also musically literate and talented. So it does, I'd be lying if I said it didn't somewhat affect my like willingness to absorb some ideas, because I know you do understand music, right? You're not just some pie in the sky art guy, like we'll do this and that, and you understand what, how music also works. So yeah, I think it did help my ability to accept some of your ideas, I think.
I think one instance where I think we did get a little bit more into the kind of technical weeds to great effect was towards the climax in the third act, the very latter part of the movie, where we were trying to find a way to seamlessly unite all of these different gradations that were happening in that sequence, where we're starting from almost kind of a mysterious what's going to happen next kind of suspension of tension, and then we move into what actually does happen, and then we graduate that into this whole very, very chaotic blend of time periods that are mounting towards the fundamental resolution of the movie. And the challenge I remember in that section that I think we did talk a little bit more in that particular cue in more musically precise terms, because let's face it, that was like a 10 to 15 minute section of unbroken composition, and finding a way to keep it continually reinventing and to continually sort of upgrading the feelings of.
Right, but it's still more like emotional structure based. You weren't like,
True.
now it needs to be D minor, and then
Right.
we weren't talking like in this
No,
way,
that's
right?
true.
So
That's
it's still
exactly true.
more like structurally, we're talking about the structure, but still more in emotional
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
which is what I can understand. I wouldn't, if you started talking in octaves and keys and whatever, I would just tune that out.
Yeah.
That's not a language I really speak. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, there was more in this. There were in certain areas more than others. There was more of that. Which, like I said, these were a lot of things that when I did the first pass, I didn't really think of a lot of these
Yeah.
things, And then as it evolved, and we worked back and forth and spent it has to be hundreds of hours we spent on.
Yeah, absolutely had to.
I'm sure it was in the hundreds.
Yeah, it was for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, the hundreds of hours we spent discussing, and then I started to understand, more and more. But the funny thing is, yeah, it's if you listen to the first pass I did to the end, yeah, it's very different, but it's all still in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just a much more evolved version, but like a lot of it is still, most of it is still in there. It just kind of evolved into something much, much deeper and greater, and something that I think actually spoke to the movie itself. But I would say that most of it's still in there. And I did, like I told my girlfriend at the time when she said, "How do you, what's your secret?" I was like, "Well, the difference is 90% of what he told me was actually correct." So I'm like, when you start telling me stuff that's correct, then maybe I'll listen to you. That's how that'll work.
I'm sure she loved that.
Yeah, she loved that. But like I said, look, there was a couple things I stuck to my guns on that I wouldn't listen.
Yes,
but
and rightly so.
And I still stick by that. But I will admit, most of the things that you told me to, I wouldn't say change, but like evolve or alter stuff, you were correct. Like in most of those cases, you were correct. I was like, okay, this is actually objectively better. What it changed into is objectively better than what it was. So, I can't argue with that.
It's hard to know. It's hard to know what a scene is asking, right? It's hard to know what exactly it pairs with the picture to underwrite the emotion and the flow and the tensions that are in a given scene. But I think, there's the old Michelangelo adage about the veining in the marble. I carved until I set the angel free, something like that. And I think that was more to the process of what I think we were doing in admixture, was continuing to just kind of beat at the scenes with notes and with experimentation until we did get to something that I think in many regards is the greatest compliment that I've heard in response to your score, which is that in so many instances, in it becomes subconscious. It's not actively something where in many types of films, and certainly in the era of much more bombastic orchestral scoring, where you're very conscious of the score and you're very conscious of what it's trying to tell you to feel. Whereas in what I think you were able to achieve and what works so well, particularly for what we were trying to collectively achieve with the feeling and the sensibility of this particular film, was to create this sort of unconscious but very felt and very moving bed of soundscape beneath it, where you are being emotionally guided, you are being tension and stress produced, but at the same time, you're not like acutely aware of the music doing that to you, manipulating you, making
Well, I
you
think
oppressively feel something as some sort of, sort of third party add on. It's so enmeshed in what's happening on screen. And that's what I feel like we achieved, or you achieved, was to make basically the springs in the couch imperceptible, right? You just sit down and it's there and it's working, it's supporting you, but you don't understand the mechanics of what's happening there. It's like a
yeah, I think part of that is because of the way we approached it. I mean, I'm not a expert on film score history, but as far as I know, I don't know many, if any, films that like did what we did, in that it's one piece that was composed for that, and it's all intertwining over.
yeah,
It's like most things. It's like clearly they farm different things from different sources, or someone composed different things at different times, they put them in, so it feels somewhat incongruous.
yeah,
And I think that's why you notice it more, because you can tell they weren't all composed for that in one. This is like one monolith, and there's
yeah,
literally like tiny flickers of something that happened in minute 47 that refer to minute 130 because it occurred in 130. So I mean, that's why it was so difficult to make, I think, because it's so, to make it all connect like that.
yeah.
And I think that was important for me because that's how my work is. So I didn't want to lose that quality in the movie, but it definitely made it a lot harder to do. But I think it kind of lends to it becoming more subconscious instead
Yeah,
of
well,
like
that's
in your.
entirely, I mean, going way back to the start of our conversation here, that very much in particular, as such a hallmark of your style in the type of music you do for your recordings, throughout all the evolution of your style, not to say that your styles remained, an absolute unshakable constant. You've taken many different steps and directions. But the thing that unites, in my mind, your work, and that guided me to reach out to you for doing the score and thinking you were inherently cinematic in your musical composition style, was that you do take musical themes, musical ideas that rework and reconfigure throughout your pieces, and often take on sort of evolved reconstitutions as the pieces of music progress. And I thought that's exactly the type of musical mind that I thought would line up so well, not only with the mood of this film, but also the philosophy of the film. Because in a way, the sort of recycling and reconfiguring of themes and of stitching pieces from here with pieces from there in an elegant and congruent way, that was very much also what the movie was about, what the deeper tissue of sort of the philosophy of the film was about. So all that said, it became sort of a no-brainer that I saw and heard in your work an effortless transition into scoring. Now I know it wasn't effortless, as we just diagnosed, but it certainly you know, your style of composition and your sensibility musically ended up being perfectly suited for what we set out to do.
I think they were born to go together. Like I mean, I saw that when you sent me the first, when I first saw it. I mean, that was the first thing I thought. I mean, even though it had its challenges along the way, but I mean, I think my music in this film, it was born to be together.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
We got there in the end.
So let me ask you guys, were there any particular sequences in the film that were the most difficult to, sort of get, or at least to agree upon, to get to a point where like, okay, we're gonna move forward here. We're at a particular spot where we both are happy.
You got one that's still a splinter in the skin?
No, no, not necessarily. Like I said, I think I just laugh because I know that that one scene with Theo in like the dining room that I just would not bend on. Yeah, because I just laugh at that because I just think that that's so perfect in that So I just laugh that like I was so unbending in that particular scene.
Oh, you were 100% right, and I'm glad you stuck to your guns on it, because I would at this now being enough removed from the process to be objective as I can. It was absolutely the right decision to leave that alone. I think, interestingly enough, some of the more, like, let's say, grand and sort of spectacle sequences that you would think would be more laborious to kind of get the music to work right with, those tended to fall into place the easiest. And it was more some of the really quiet and intimate, more dramatic, almost just interpersonal dialogue scenes where we knew we wanted to have score support some of the emotionality of what was happening, and also kind of build in some degree of tension, because we didn't quite know where the emotionality was going to take us, if there was something right around the corner that we don't expect. It was some of those more intimate scenes that I think we went back and forth on more, and not because we were throwing darts and missing the board at all. It was just because they were so sort of quiet and intimate to find the right thing that achieved exactly what we were talking about before, that sort of subconscious level of being there, but being there almost imperceptibly, was something I know we hammered on a few of those types of scenes a good couple of times. But there's not, when I think back, and maybe I'm fully healed now, but I don't remember one particular scene being something where we really just kept kind of orbiting around and either getting closer or further away, because we evolved such a good manner of communicating. And that doesn't always mean, mind you, that communication was completely porous and completely kumbaya. A lot of times it was stand your ground because this is the right thing and don't fuck with it. And you were very forthright about that in many instances. And there was a couple times I was.
There was your dreaded anytime. Okay, so blah blah. This time to this time, I love it. As soon as I heard "I love it," I'm like, oh god.
Yeah, the love it was often just braiding the
I love
noose
it,
before
but
the floor drops
it all
out.
needs to change.
Yeah, there was.
But no,
we
I
had a good
think,
joke
like you
about
said,
that.
I think that's what it wasn't. It wasn't always me. Sometimes you held your ground and you were correct. Sometimes I held my ground and I was correct, and sometimes the opposite was true. I mean, it went. I think it ran the gamut for that.
And sometimes we were both wrong, and in being wrong, we kind of said,
Yeah, that's true.
this.
There were times when we were
Let's
both wrong, and then when it
scratch
came
it.
out again, where I was like, oh, okay, this we were both wrong, and it came out better. So yeah, there was times of
Yeah.
all that.
Well, Brock, can you talk about how you technically went about the scoring process? For example, did you work with ideas with the picture playing, in the background? And can you talk a little bit about how you might have mapped out your ideas for particular scenes, and especially to chart the peaks and valleys of dynamics?
Yeah, I would just because it was kind of a new thing for me. So like it was kind of a mix of working with playing it a lot. Obviously, I mean, I watched it just over and over and over. So at a certain point, I didn't need to play it anymore because it's just so burned into my brain that it basically was from memory. I mean, I think I could literally, tell you every second of the movie at this point. But I think throughout a lot of it, yeah, it was just constantly. I mean, I had a monitor in the studio that was playing it. So I don't want to say I was working necessarily like second by second, but it was just more the emotion of the scene and like the rises and falls and the overall kind of movement of it that would inspire what I was doing. And then I would put that down first. Jason knows because he would like experience a lot of that because I would send in rougher things. So I kind of work in a rougher thing of what I wanted to say. And then after I talked to him, then I'd go back and kind of make very minute adjustments according to like literally this millisecond or this exact person that or exact second that this happens, because then you got to kind of fine tune it. So I'd work in a broader sense first and then kind of fine tune it timing wise, which is what I learned. One of the main things I learned from doing this, because I don't need to think about that in my own music, right? I just time it according to rhythm, not to what's happening on the screen. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of, it was kind of a mix of how I normally work in my own head, but there was a lot of playing the movie over and over and over while I was working. It was definitely a major part of it.
So, Brock, would you score another film after this? You don't have to say
Absolutely.
whether it was Jason or not, just in general.
Yeah, I definitely would. If you asked me at parts of it, I probably would have answered differently. But when it was all said and done, yeah, it's still to this day, I had to make concessions or these kind of things that I'll probably never completely come to terms with because it is what it is. I know Jason, the same thing. You never completely come to terms with some concessions you had to make. It'll still always stick, and you'll always that is what it is. But I think there's something really so amazing about like being asked to be part of someone else's vision and then having what I made be part of that and then part of this greater thing of all these different things, right? The actor's vision and their work. Every person's vision and every person's work in this all coming together. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it really is an amazing thing that I don't think you could experience in any other manner.
No, it's the
So it's
beauty of
really
this
something
art form.
completely just other level. But I don't although I don't think Jason would say I was the easiest person to work with, but I would do something of this again. But I mean, I pity another director trying to go through what he went through. So I'm not sure others would have the fortitude to soldier on as he did.
I think we found that we were very like-minded. We
Mm,
were very much more similar, certainly, than we are in
dissimilar.
species. So,
Yeah.
He was very good at dealing with a lot of my temper tantrums. I think this comes from his own deep artistic background. So I think he was very skilled at dealing with artists' temper tantrums.
Well, you should be able to deal with people who are like actors, right? That's sort of all creative types. And I'm going to imagine
Yeah.
that's
I
what
have to imagine. I mean, I was pretty difficult. I have to imagine actors are generally harder than like more difficult than I was, but I don't know. I was
some
not
can be
easy in
difficult.
sometimes.
Yeah.
right.
But I think, the thing that crops up again and again is kind of the takeaway from conversations like this with mutually creatives working towards a singular end is you no one has the right answer. No one has the perfect way of doing something or arriving at an endpoint with things like this. And the fact that it is a collaborative effort, which is fundamentally different than many art forms, right? If you're writing a novel, if you're painting a picture, if you're doing your own self-guided music composition, there's no one else, at least in the early part before you get to a record label or an editor or a museum who's going to tell you whether or not they want your thing hanging on a wall. There's no one else to kind of tell you if you're right or you're wrong, or if it's
Right.
this or that. And I think in the context like this, I forget the Greek philosopher who said truth is born of debate. One of them did, but I think it's very true, because I think the friction that we went through sometimes forced us both to sort of erode our conviction about how a certain thing should be treated and come at something that was altogether, a mutual arrived upon destination, and it worked better for it. And I think, the interesting thing about, people being difficult or creatives being difficult, they should be. I think if there was just such an easy kowtow and sort of a bureaucratic yes man, yes woman culture to making a collaborative art form, you're going to get really shitty results, because the friction, the debate, the clash of viewpoints to get at something that's altogether more fully lived in by virtue of that sort of combustion, even in some cases, it's worth it if it makes you feel uncomfortable. And sometimes, you got to hang up the phone and cool off for a bit. All right, life goes on, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, not to sound trite, but like all growth comes from volatility, whether biological, artistic, economic, it doesn't matter. There's no growth without volatility. So I think
Yeah,
through that, sometimes through disagreements, and the movie's very volatile.
it is.
It's an extremely volatile, it's like, I mean, it's a very like almost quietly volatile thing. Like the entire time there's this conflict just always brewing. So I think in a sense, not to sound cheesy, but I think that lends itself to that. And I think you can kind of hear it in the music. And I think it all kind of comes together, man. But it's definitely
That's one more thought for me to add to that too. And I've had this sort of epiphany a couple of times. Is each, a film, the process of making a film and going through all of these different creative collaborations to go from start to finish. There is an aspect, and Jen, I think you'll certainly agree with me here. There is an aspect wherein you live the film. Now, I don't mean that like it just takes a lot of your time. It certainly does. But you live part of the concept. You live part of the material, seeps in, and that border between creative and created gets a little blurry, and you start to, even some of the conflicts and some of the concepts of interpersonal communication that are in the film start to kind of meet themselves out in the real world. I think they did for Brock and I in certain instances, and that, there's even bleed into peripheral circumstances in one's life. And I think that's just some of the mess you sort of have to accept doing this. And the irony is that what we're after, in a way, is the most sort of developed form of order, because you're taking so many variables and you're trying to organize them into something unified, but yet there is this very porous mess that happens between what the creative thing is in terms of what it's about and how it's bleeding into your own psyche and your own relationships in the making of it. And if that can be managed and it can be bordered in a healthy, constructive way, I think you can get really good stuff from it. And I think that Brock and I like to think, let the movie and the story and what it was about get into our bloodstream enough that we weren't dealing with just sort of a superficial conversation about how do we amplify a scene or how do we make this emotionally relatable at this point, but rather we were dealing from a much more deep tissue place where it was so fully integrated into what we were talking about and what we were communicating with each other that when we did come into any measure of disagreement about a scene or any kind of constructive conversation about changes, it was because we were both so kind of enmeshed in the greater good of trying to do right by what the creative thing was asking of us. I hope that makes
I mean, it
sense.
completely overtook my life. Like it not remember I told you I was seeing the mass face on billboards, and I mean,
Yeah.
I was seeing things in the movie in places, but not only that, but even just interpersonal communications. Like you said, the psychology of the film and the communications and stuff, it bled into my own, like I could see it in my behavior. I could
Yeah.
even see my like body language when I was teaching or how I was dealing with someone. I could see it mirroring
Yeah.
parts from the movie, or inflections in my tone were mirroring parts. I mean, it completely, so I think you made a good point. I think even though it wasn't the film wasn't my creation, but I think at a certain point we both felt so personal
Hmm.
because it was so into that we would get very, entrenched in maybe our own way of how that should be interpreted, because it just
Yeah.
became so, yeah, I mean, it was every second of my, it was just every like second and every inch of my psyche was that. It still is in a lot of ways. I still see parts of that movie. I'll be doing something even now, and it'll still flash because I feel there's some kind of subconscious reflection of that, and like parts of that will still flash in my mind. So it'll probably always be like that. So
Cool.
thanks a lot.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So Brock, where can we listen to the score as well as your other music and or buy, download? How can we fan girl you?
The score is in the movie, but my all my music, I mean, it's all over the place. I would never recommend Spotify, but it is on Spotify. But
Right.
I
It's
mean, I
on
have
Apple
my
Music too, where I tend to listen to
yeah, Apple
your
Music
work
or
on
my
Apple.
Bandcamp. So it's mostly through either Spotify or Apple Music. If you want to stream it, if you want to buy it, it's through my Bandcamp. Obviously, record stores, these kind of things. It's not hard to find if you want to find it. I guess put it that way.
You guys have anything else to say before I do some closing?
When we were in the process, yeah, we got very much in the we'd start talking about that, then we're talking about some other completely unrelated philosophical matter for two
Yes.
hours, and then suddenly we're talking about the movie again. So it's
But I think that helped. I think that
yeah, but that's
actually
the
helped.
thing.
I
That's
think
all
those
part of it. I
digressions
mean,
helped.
yeah, it was all part of it. Because I mean, a big part of it was like, yeah, okay, you came to me because of my music, and that was like a big part of it because I feel I mean, I wasn't joking with this. There was things you said to me about my music that to me was understood it more than I understood it, and that's no joke. So you were clearly the right, when you came to me and over the process. I mean, that's again why I was like more receptive to you than I probably would be a lot of people.
Well, thanks so much for the really interesting conversation, guys. Great kind of deep dive into your collaboration. And even if you're not a musician, I think that it's kind of it was a lot of insight into what it would be like to kind of find an artist that you like and get them to do your movie. It's kind of would be any filmmaker's dream. So
Yeah, it
thank you
was.
so much,
It
and
was.
make sure to keep you'll make sure to keep your fans and the viewers of the film informed about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Brock.
Okay,
Always
thanks,
great
guys.
to see you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
All right, thank you.